What's up, everybody? Merry Christmas. How you doing today? Great turnout so far. Wow, this is awesome. We got a lot of great stuff to go through today. This has been a long time pet peeve of mine, so I'm really looking forward to this. Let's see here. What's up, everybody? Oh, how you doing today? Great turnout so far. Wow, this is awesome. Alrighty. Alrighty. Okay. Who do we get out there? All right, let's see who's here. Colin, what's up? Richard, what's up? Mark, what's up? Janet, what's up? Oh, let's get the sound turned down on this. Here we go. Raj! Oh man. Oh, so good to see you, brother. I'm so glad you're here. Awesome. Awesome. What's up, Laurel? How are you today? Merry Christmas to you too, Raj. Thank you for coming. Besnan, what's up? What is up? Good to see you. Good to see you. And Bites. I have sad news. It looks like there's not going to be another Astronosis next year. I'm really bummed. We're going to have to figure out something else. I've been talking to Greg, talking about maybe doing something down in Florida. We'll see how it goes. Why am I low? Just gonna. Oh, my chair needs some oil. Need some oil. What's up, Bran? What's up, Aki Guinea? I hope everybody caught the post on the mothership today. This Luigi thing, I don't know, man. This is just a freak show. I don't know even what to say anymore. Like, why is this stuff showing up in that story? It's just crazy. Void of Silence, what's up? Merry Christmas to you. All right. Wow, got a great crowd so far. This is awesome. This is awesome. Well, we're waiting for more folks to come in. Um, this has been something I've been wanting to do for a long time. I think I might have announced it a while ago. It just took me a while to sort of put it all together, and of course, you want to do it in a timely fashion. But I still see memes online on social media from Zeitgeist, and it just drives me up a wall. It's just like, are we still doing this? Are we still this completely baseless information? So, what I want to get into now, I mean, there's been plenty of debunkings of Zeitgeist. What I want to get into is I want to sort of get into the psychology and the history and sort of explain to you what I think is really going on here. Um, as I've mentioned, I did know Acharya, not well, or Acharya, however it's pronounced. I didn't call her that, by the way. Um, I didn't know her well, but we had some conversations, and she was really nice enough to do a blurb for the Secret History of Rock and Roll, which I was really gratified by. Um, but she was a very, very troubled woman and very untimely death, and it's very, very sad. But I think there was some psychology at work there that I think I want to explore and unpack. Let's see now. So we're going to get into that. This whole school of thought, let's just call it, has a history, and it's based in, not really in scholarship, but I think it's based more in emotion. I think this is an emotional response. Let's see here. The spiritualized video is no longer on my page. Excuse me, folks. Got to look into this. I'm seeing it here. Don't know what that's all about. Let me just tell Julie to come join us at the join us here. All right. Alrighty then. Let's see what's going on here. 40. Oh my goodness. What a crowd. We're really packing them in today. This is awesome. I got a good show for you. So you will not be disappointed. Believe me. You will not be disappointed. Let's see what's going on with the chat now. Here we go. What's up, Steve? What's up, TC? What's up, Bran? All right. This is great. We got a great turnout. Great turnout. Some very worthwhile information, too, that I think will make it appropriate for the time of year. I'm just going to wait a few more minutes, give people time to get settled, and then we'll get this presentation rolling. Oh my goodness, here we go. We've got quite a crowd going. The good news too is that this isn't going to be a huge presentation, but there's a lot of text to go through. Two-minute warning, all right? Got 2 more minutes. We're going to get this thing going. Give everybody a chance to get your hot cider and your powdered donuts and your Swedish meatballs. And when I was a kid, we used to make these things for Christmas. We'd take dates and put walnuts in them and then dip them in powdered sugar. Oh, so good. So good. One-minute warning, folks. 1-minute warning. What do you guys think of doing these on Sunday afternoon? Let me know. Is it a better time for you? I know it's better for our friends overseas. So. Obsessed with dates. So good. Dates are so good. Nature's candy. All right. James, isn't it? It's James, right? I'm trying to remember. I'm terrible with names, so don't be offended. All right. The Equiline. That's a new name. Welcome. Glad to see you. Very glad to see you. All right, Richard. Well, you know what? You can always watch the archive. Well, the archive will be up as soon as the show's over, so you're good to go. All right, here we go. Here we go, folks. We're going to get this party started, all right? So, Christmas is not Mithras. Christmas is not Mithras, all right? And we're going to be deflating a lot of the arguments that linger to this day from Zeitgeist, much to my chagrin. And I must say that I understand the appeal of some of these theories. You know, I was into them myself back in the day. Before I knew better, before I started reading primary source material, which is really the key here. When I started looking into Acharya's sources, some huge red flags came up. And when she was challenged on them, she kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say she weaseled out, but she didn't really have a strong argument for why she was using like all these theosophists as sources. What's up, pig dog? So let's get into this. First of all, let's talk about Peter Joseph, American filmmaker, musician, author, and activist. Wrote and produced the Zeitgeist films. These films garner millions of views online. Joseph also has a background in music, having released an album of Bach's transcriptions for marimba. Bach on marimba. Wow. There's a CV special for you. In 2002, he founded the Zeitgeist movement. In 2009, which is a sustainability advocacy group aimed at promoting a new system based on a resource-based economy. He was also mixed up with the Venus Project for a while, which kind of lost him a lot of his credibility because they had sort of some wacky ideas that weren't really consonant with the kind of things that he was talking about in Zeitgeist, all right? So Zeitgeist the movie, 2007. This was one of the, I don't know, was this one of the first viral videos? I mean, this is really before YouTube really came into its own. I mean, YouTube, I guess it was very primitive at the time. So this is a viral video before social media, well, before social media as we know it today. This is an internet legend, okay? And like most internet legends of the early days, it's totally full of crap. So we'll get into that. We're going to concentrate on part one, of course. Part one argues that Christianity is mainly derived from other religions, astrological myths, and older traditions. It asserts that Jesus is a literary and astrological hybrid nurtured by political forces. All right. Just 1 second here. Part 2 alleges that the 9/11 attacks were orchestrated or allowed to happen by elements within the government to generate fear, justify the war on terror, curtail civil liberties, and for economic gain. It asserts that the government had advanced knowledge of the attacks and deliberately allowed them. Part 3 states that the Federal Reserve is controlled by a cabal of international bankers who conspire to create global calamities for profit. It also claims that the federal income tax is illegal. Part 3 also alleges a secret agreement to merge the U.S., Canada, and Mexico into a North American Union as a step towards a single world government. So this is a very interesting mix, because you get sort of, atheistic left-wing ideas in part one, mixing with these more kind of populist patriot sort of ideas in part three. Just to make sure. Am I frozen? All right. So there we go. All right, folks. So this is really the main concern here. This is what I'm interested in, is part one and the claims that were made about these so-called Jesus predecessors. Okay. Now, I'm going to be arguing against Jesus mythicism, which is the concept that Jesus had never existed, was a purely fictional construct. I'm not going to be making any theological claims. This is not apologetics. This is purely looking at bad history and how bad history becomes almost accepted knowledge, okay? And that's really what I'm concerned about. Let me just see here. All right. Okay, good. So, yeah, Jesus, born of a virgin, born on December 25th, star in the east, 12 disciples, performed miracles, dead for 3 days, and then resurrected. Okay. Now, that December 25th day is very important because that is not biblical. That came much, much later. All right. So in come the parade of the old gods. Horus, born on December 25th, born of a virgin, star in the east, adored by 3 kings, teacher at 12, baptized, ministry at 30, 12 disciples. I mean, these are the claims made by Zeitgeist, all of which are completely and totally fictitious, okay? Horus performed miracles, Lamb of God, the light, was crucified, dead for 3 days, and resurrected. Again, none of this is true, and we'll get into what actually is the story. This is all fabrication. Dionysus, born of a virgin, which is arguable, born on December 25th, no record of that, performed miracles, most gods do. King of Kings, Alpha and Omega. He had a number of nicknames, let's just say, and I've never seen either one of those, but that's not to say there aren't books that I haven't seen. Resurrected, not exactly true. I want you to take a close look at that amulet on the left, because that's going to be very, very important in our discussion, all right? That's an amulet allegedly of Dionysus crucified, and we see his Greek name, Bacchus, okay? That is something that we're going to look at very shortly. Krishna, born of a virgin, star in the east, performed miracles, resurrected. Again, none of this is, I mean, at best it's arguable, but even then it's not really applicable, not born of a virgin. All gods perform miracles, wasn't exactly resurrected, okay? Attis, born of a virgin, born on December 25th, crucified, dead for 3 days, resurrected. None of this is true at all, okay? This is all lies, all right? Of course, Mithras, born of a virgin, born on December 25th, 12 disciples, performed miracles, dead for 3 days, resurrected. Again, none of this is true at all. This is all false, but people have watched this video and processed it for so long that they do start to believe that it is true, okay? The astrotheology is a little more interesting, but there are all these weird errors, one of which is there's no record of Virgo being called the house of bread, okay? And the 3 kings and Sirius, the star in the east. 3 kings is basically a medieval creation. It's not listed in the Bible. Nobody is referred to as a king. Magi, later wise men, and Sirius, okay? So the thing with this astrotheology is that, they're following the star to the birthplace of Jesus, which is in the house of bread, but these constellations are nowhere near each other. All right, this is all just it's bad astronomy. It's bad theology. All right. So Jesus came forth wearing a crown of thorns. All right. Now this is, arguable, but the crown of thorns was meant to mock Jesus. So I'm not sure what the implication is there. And again, I mean, there are a number of things that I'm going to say that I believe about the gospel accounts to be true, but a lot of it may be interpolation, mythologization, if that's a word. We're going to explore how this is a very, very common practice to this day. All right, to this day. They go into this whole thing with the cross from the zodiac. The cross was not a Christian symbol until much, much later. It was not used by Christians as a symbol. The cross with the sun at the center is from other traditions, notably Celtic, Gaelic, Northern European. It has no history in early Christianity. Okay, so this is all. A lot of the arguments they make with the astrotheology, they're not basing on any accounts actually in the Bible script, or they're making errors based on the Bible script. So it's interesting, but I don't think it really says anything one way or the other. Okay, so let's get into, so that's Zeitgeist, all right? That's the part one you're all familiar with. I'm skipping through it very, very quickly because I really don't want to dignify it any more than it's worth. I mean, it's very well made. It's very, it's excellent propaganda. It's an excellent piece of propaganda. It's the narration, the music, the graphics are all excellent. Unfortunately, all the information is completely false. So let's get into Mithras. Zeitgeist significantly misrepresents Mithraic mythology, rituals, and relationship with Christianity. Mithras is not depicted as having disciples, performing healing miracles, or even being born in the manner described in the film. Mithras basically self-generated from a rock, was not born to a virgin, and was not born in a cave. I mean, all the things that are claimed in the film and by people ever since are false. There is no evidence from artifacts or texts suggesting Mithras died or was resurrected. The rituals in Mithraism were akin to a spiritual rebirth, very common in the ancient mysteries, not a washing of sins as in Christian baptism. And the communal meal in Mithraism did not have Eucharistic connotations. Okay, so we know the Eucharist, the Last Supper, this is my blood, this is my body. That was not part of Mithraism as we know it. While both religions existed concurrently, scholars argue any similarities are coincidental or due to shared cultural influences. Mithraism was a mystery religion with its own distinct mythology and rituals that developed independently of Christianity. All right, so there's a lot of arguments to be made with a lot of the symbolism and the liturgy and all these things that come much, much later in the history of the church, being part of its milieu, being part of its culture, being part of its environment. Okay, we see the same thing now when we have, contemporary Christian music or, Christian movies. I mean, religions are always drawing from their environments. All right, there's not this whole idea that's like something found in a cave and by Indiana Jones and untouched by the world outside. That's just not the way it works. All right. Okay, Zeitgeist makes several claims about Phrygian god Attis that are historically inaccurate or misleading. Just make this up. Attis was born from an almond or pomegranate that fell into the lap of Nana, who is not described as a virgin. Attis did not die by crucifixion. He castrated himself under a pine tree in a fit of madness and was transformed into a pine tree, or died and was mourned by his followers. His resurrection is more about his spirit continuing through nature, not a physical resurrection after 3 days. Okay. Now, I've got a huge lag here. Let me just see here. Give me just 1 second. Okay. So, there's no historical or mythological evidence supporting that Attis had any disciples, let alone 12. Okay? So, again, completely fictitious. Zeitgeist makes several false claims about Horus. Isis, who is not a virgin, conceived Horus by magically impregnating herself with Osiris's semen after his death. The name Isis Mary, which is used in the film, was wholly concocted by Gerald Massey using a Roman root word for sea because she was identified as the star of the sea in Rome. This whole Mary name was invented by Gerald Massey. No reality in any ancient texts. The ancient Egyptians did not celebrate Horus's birth on December 25th, but on different times of the year. There's nothing in Egyptian lore about a special star appearing, especially not one guiding anyone to Horus's birthplace. Zeitgeist claims 3 kings followed this star to honor Horus. There's no record or depiction of this in any ancient Egyptian texts or iconography. Okay, this is all completely made up. Zeitgeist asserts that Horus was baptized at 30 by Anup and began his ministry. There's no evidence of either. Horus was involved in battles and governance as a sky god, not in ministry of teaching or healing. There's no evidence stating Horus had 12 followers in the manners of Jesus' disciples. There was 4 followers, which represented the seasons, but the rest of it is just completely concocted. Horus never died in the myths, did not experience crucifixion, burial, or resurrection. That better describes Osiris, who was killed, dismembered, and then pieced back together to lord over the dead. But this is not a crucifixion and does not involve a resurrection in the Christian sense. The film mentions Horus being betrayed, which he wasn't. His conflict with Seth is about a power struggle rather than a betrayal leading to death. Okay? Give me just 1 second here, folks. Just want to make sure. Why am I frozen here? Give me just 1 second. Excuse me, forgive me. I just want to make sure that we're not experiencing some glitches. All right. Well, hopefully we're good. Hopefully we're good. I don't know why I'm lagging so far behind here. Zeitgeist stupidity was spread like a plague by the clown prince of stupid, Bill Maher, in his agitprop documentary Religious. Okay, he repeated all the claims wholesale. So what people didn't garner from Zeitgeist, they saw in this film, which was a rather considerable hit as a documentary. Inspired by frauds like Stephen Fry, half-witted atheist trolls still cite Zeitgeist's baseless nonsense about figures like Mithras to this day. Okay. Now, again, the interest for me here is not religious. It's just the absolute abuse of history, but also the kind of smarmy, smug confidence that these people give themselves in completely false information. All right. Here she is. Enter Acharya, because Acharya is the one from whom Peter Joseph got all his information. And this is important for a number of reasons, all right? Acharya S, born Dorothy Milne Murdoch, 1960 to 2015, was an American writer and independent scholar. She was best known for her advocacy of the Christ myth theory, which posits that Jesus never existed as a historical person, but was a compilation of other myths and deities. She received a degree in classics, Greek civilization from Franklin and Marshall. She also studied at the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, Greece. She published several books, the first being The Christ Conspiracy, 1999, Sons of God, Krishna, Buddha, and Christ Unveiled, Who Was Jesus, Fingerprints of the Christ, Christ in Egypt, the Horus-Jesus Connection, The Gospel According to Acharya S, and Did Moses Exist, The Myth of the Israelite Lawgiver. Okay, I have all these books. I've read all these books. A couple I have on PDFs, I think, that I got from her. I actually bought directly from her. There's some really excellent research in them, which is really frustrating because she'll have all this really interesting research and really a lot of it's very convincing, and then all this garbage, all this theosophical nonsense from the 19th century. And all the other, people like that we're going to look at, like Alvin, Boyd, Kuhn. It's really a shame. Something happened to her that I don't know what. I can't even speculate, but she was very, very angry and obsessed about something. We will never know. I did just buy her her autobiography that I've been reading on Kindle. It's a bit frustrating because they're all emailed interviews, but I don't know. Something really happened because she was brilliant. And in my mind, I always place her in the same category as Tracy Twyman. The two of them, that sort of influenced me at a certain point in my life, both around the same time, reading Christ Conspiracy and Dagobert's Revenge around the same time, late 90s, early 2000s. Both very brilliant women, but I think both had ghosts, something haunting them, all right? In The Christ Conspiracy, Acharya S suggests that Christianity is a rehashing of astrotheological myths. Critics argue that she stretches or misinterprets ancient texts to fit this narrative. She claims the Gospels were written in the 2nd or 3rd century, where most scholars place them in the late 1st to early 2nd century. Okay, Acharya S uses outdated or fringe scholarship to make claims that are not accepted by most historians or biblical scholars. The book implies conspiracy, hence the term The Christ Conspiracy, by secret societies and mystery schools to fabricate Christianity. She should know better than to use a term like mystery school, which is ahistorical. This lacks historical evidence and is a misrepresentation of how religions evolve. Acharya draws numerous parallels between Jesus and pagan deities, but these comparisons are based on tenuous links, misinterpretations, or errors. Okay. Now, again, the thing that really has always puzzled me, as soon as I realized that so many of her sources were garbage, was why was she continuing to make these arguments based on these very, very poor sources? And she had some idea that, people like Massey were privy to some ancient secret society interpretations, which is just, there's no basis to it. Okay. But, she said that the Jesus was created by ancient Freemasons, and the whole thing about Tecton is really like that he was a stonemason and all that kind of thing. Very, very 1999 book, all right? Very 90s, very Usenet. She actually started her site called Truth Be Known back, I think, in 95. So she was on the web very, very early. Now this is where she really got herself into trouble. And this is straight out of Zeitgeist. This is from a temple at Luxor. Acharya claimed that this frieze in the temple of Luxor depicted Immaculate Conception of Horus thousands of years before Christ. And of course, the film argues this as well. Unfortunately, this is a scholar named Janet Johnson. The scene showing the god Amun visiting the Queen Mother to impregnate her with the future ruler, in this case, is Queen Hatshepsut. A Christian interpretation just doesn't work. But Richard Carrier, who we'll get into in a bit, several things are very clear from the written narrative. The adoration scene only involves important state officials, not kings or magi. The Luxor inscription does not depict impregnation by a spirit, but involves very real sex, and the woman involved is the mythical queen of Egypt in an archetypal sense, not Isis per se. So it's Hatshepsut, right? Understanding their background and cultural and historical context is helpful and necessary and doesn't lead to any plagiaristic scandal of the sort Acharya S wants there to be. So we're going to get into this guy, Richard Carrier. He's also a mythicist, Christ mythicist. And he is just calling her out for this very, very poor interpretation. Now, Acharya could read Greek, excuse me, she could read Roman, she could read Latin, and Hebrew. So she was reading a lot of these texts in their primary sources, which she started to incorporate later on in her work, but again, she just would not let go of these really dumb misinterpretations. This is one of her major ones, Apollonius of Tyana, quoting Acharya. It has been suggested by not a few people that Jesus Christ is a fictional character based on Apollonius of Tyana, although Christians beginning in the early times cast the accusation of plagiarism in the opposite direction, and we'll see with good reason. In addition to this, a striking correlation between the lives of Apollonius and the Apostle Paul, who, like Jesus, strangely finds no place in contemporary history, despite claims to his having made a ruckus in a well-documented part of the world. It appears that the stories of both Jesus and Paul were in part fabricated from that of Apollonius. Were they? Okay, this is my interjection here. Problem with Acharya's theory is that Apollonius' story was not actually written down until 230 CE or AD, depending on your preference, or so, and the Gospels and epistles had been very well circulated by that point, okay, at least for 150 years. So the story of Apollonius is only appearing in history around 230. So this is well after the Christian church had already been up and running. Moreover, Apollonius' biography was commissioned by Julia Domna, whose husband Septimus Severus was having problems with Christian groups at the time. So there was an ulterior motive in presenting a rival. Never really took off, but there you go. Now, Acharya died on Christmas, ironically enough. Very sad, though. 55 years old, way too young. And she was definitely, in my conversations with her, she was definitely, I would say that she was kind of a neo-pagan type. Definitely was very drawn to sun worship and nature worship. And this is not, I'm not telling tales out of school. She talked about this in interviews as well. So, I think that she maybe was drawn to this kind of symbolism because of, her beliefs. But I think her beliefs came out of some sort of disenchantment with the church because she had been a born-again Christian at one time, okay? All right. Acharya's many daddies. Okay. This is the first. Gerald Massey, 1828 to 1907, was an English poet, writer, and self-taught Egyptologist known for his works on spiritualism and mythology. From around 1870, Massey shifted towards comparative mythology, exploring parallels between Egyptian myths and Christian narratives, suggesting that many Bible stories were derived from Egyptian mythology. Massey was deeply involved with the spiritualist movement and argued that Darwinian evolution needed to be complemented by spiritual insights. His views on religion were controversial, often critiquing Christianity's doctrines and suggesting that its myths were borrowed from older pagan religions. So he was involved with spiritualism. I think it's probably a good bet that he was involved in theosophy as well. All right. And his works did have a major influence on the theosophical movement, particularly Madame Blavatsky. All right. Massey's work on Egyptology and his theories about Christian origins were influential with theosophists like Blavatsky and atheist writers, quote-unquote atheist writers like Acharya S. But his arguments have been largely discredited by modern Egyptologists and scholars of religion. Massey's claim about the direct influence of Egyptian mythology on Christianity is seen as overly speculative, lacking in primary evidence, and often based on misinterpretations of ancient texts. Massey drew upon what was the Egyptology of its time and has since been amended by further discoveries and research. So a lot of the information that he was drawing on, the errors were sort of baked into that, all right, because this is sort of the beginning of the great archaeological gold rush. Despite the criticisms, Massey's influence can be seen in fringe theories about the origins of Christianity. All right. Sir James Frazer's work, The Golden Bough, compared Jesus Christ to the sacred king sacrifice, which was controversial in Victorian society, and with good reason, I would argue. Frazer's theory of religion was that human consciousness evolved from magic to religion to science, and he believed that primitive religions originated from magical practices. Frazer's work influenced the study of mythology and comparative religion, but some of his theories have been challenged. For example, the idea of a generalized dying and rising motif, which Frazer based on the resemblance to the story of Christ, is now considered outmoded. So, again, Zeitgeist is really basing a lot of its arguments on this whole dying, rising motif, which is not nearly as settled as people like Acharya would argue, and a lot of other Christ mythicists. This whole idea of a dying, rising God is not quite as solid as they might think, all right? This is Alvin Boyd Kuhn. Here he says, prayers offered in Christian worship in the earliest days of the faith were addressed to our Lord the Son, evidencing that primitive Christians were quite in the spirit of pagan forms and ideologies. Again, there's no evidence of that. Maybe some sort of Gnostic groups or anything, but there's no evidence of that in what was the mainstream of Christianity. Which, granted, is very hard to make any positive statements about, considering that there were so many different sects that kind of have been papered over. Anyhow, Alvin Boyd Kuhn, an American theosophist, made claims about Jesus that have been widely criticized for inaccuracies and methodological flaws. Kuhn often interprets Christian symbols and narratives through a highly symbolic, mystical lens. He claims that Christian terms like Christ or Jesus have direct etymological links in Egyptian words like Ayusa or cursed. Egyptologists and linguists refute these connections. Kuhn argues that Christianity was a misinterpretation of a symbolic, mystical teaching. He claims that church leaders began to misread the Bible literally, which was previously seen as allegory. The idea that Christianity was uniformly allegorical before becoming literal is not supported by historical evidence. Kuhn's works are criticized for lacking rigor and being based more on theosophical interpretations than on historical or archaeological evidence. Again, so much of the culture that we take for granted, all the science fiction, superheroes, New Age, yoga. I mean, so many things. And apparently here, Jesus mythicism, all come from theosophy. It's amazing that a movement that has largely been forgotten today popularized all these ideas. Okay. G.A. Wells. Now, he has a different take on it, which is kind of refreshing. G.A. Wells' book suggests that the earliest Christian documents show no familiarity with the gospel of Jesus as a preacher and miracle worker who lived and died in the recent decades. Okay, so a lot of it he's talking about the writings of Paul and so on. Rather, the early epistles present Jesus as a supernatural personage only obscurely on earth as a man at some unspecified period in the past. Wells believed that the Jesus of these earliest Christians was not based on a historical character, but on a pure myth based in the Jewish wisdom figure Sophia. So a bit different take on it, and he's staying more in the realm of Judaism rather than all this mystery cult and paganist stuff that is rather spurious. Okay, but he later kind of walked a lot of this back, but we won't go into that. But all I want to show you is that Acharya and people like her, and ultimately Zeitgeist, were drawing on a lot of authors. There were a ton of authors, most of which we're not going to go into, but believe me, this was a cottage industry, all right? John Allegro, in his books The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross and the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Christian Myth, British archaeologist, philologist John M. Allegro advanced the theory that stories of early Christianity originated in a shamanistic Essene clandestine cult centered around the use of hallucinogenic mushrooms. Allegro also argued that the story of Jesus was based on the crucifixion of the teacher of righteousness in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, so Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in the mid to late 40s. Kind of kept under lock and key, but began to be opened, restored, and interpreted in the 60s into the 70s. And John Allegro was part of that operation and believed that this was all basically a hallucinogen cult. All right. Robert Price completed his Master of Theological Studies at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in 1978. He then earned 2 PhD degrees from Drew, one in Systematic Theology in 1981 and another in New Testament in 1991. He did become a minister, Baptist minister. I remember reading about him in the New York Times in early 90s when this church was closing. Little did I have any idea that I'd end up running across him on several occasions. Price has served as a professor of theology at the Coleman Theological Seminary and professor of biblical criticism at the Center for Inquiry Institute, formerly known as Psychops. So yeah, he's in with all those kind of folks. Price espouses the Christ myth theory, which posits that Jesus did not exist historically, but as a mythic figure, blah, 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 blah. He is also known for editing the Journal of Higher Criticism and for his involvement with the Jesus Seminar. Robert Funk and the gang. John Dominic Crossan was also involved in that, a group focused on examining the historicity of Jesus. Okay? Very, very controversial group back in the 80s and 90s. Oh, Richard Carrier is an American historian, philosopher, author, and active atheist activist. He holds a PhD in ancient history from Columbia and a BA from Berkeley in history and classical civilizations. Again, we're dealing with a lot of people who have real credentials here. I've actually kind of, streamlined these descriptions here, but all these people involved in this movement, or most of them today, are very well educated, and I do have to start to wonder what the impetus behind this is. So Carrier argues for Christ myth theory. His books involve Proving History, Bayes' Theorem, and the Quest for the Historical Jesus, and on the historicity of Jesus, why we might have reason for doubt. While Acharya's work has been praised for its methodological approach, his conclusions regarding mythicism are not widely accepted in mainstream biblical scholarship. Okay. So again, I mean, these people are way more credentialed than I am, but there are some really big holes in their argument that we're going to get into. Now, this book, Jesus Mysteries, I don't know whether this came before Acharya's book or after. Probably lifted a lot of material from her website. And there are other websites, similar websites, some of which are still up, by the way. The Jesus Mysteries, according to Bart Ehrman. So this is written by Timothy Freaky and Peter Gandy. According to Bart Ehrman, a very well-known biblical scholar, and a former Christian, by the way, I guess he identifies now as agnostic, most of Freaky and Gandy's alleged evidence is either fabricated, gross misinterpretation, or mere assertion based on the claims of other writers rather than actual historical evidence. Okay, now the 90s were huge for this stuff. I mean, Picknett and Prince did some books on this kind of thing. It was just all over the place. Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas. There were a lot of books sort of reinterpreting Christianity and Christian history. Ehrman concludes this is not serious scholarship. It is sensationalist writing driven by a desire to sell books. Well, a lot of these books sold really well back then. Author and activist Richard Carrier, who we just discussed, has stated, this is hilarious, the Jesus Mysteries will disease a reader's mind with rampant, unsourced falsehoods and completely miseducate. So even people in that field thought that this was a bunch of nonsense, but it did very well. Now, this is where that amulet that we talked about before came. The Dionysus, born of a virgin, no. Born on December 25th, no. Performed miracles, well, they all did. King of Kings, Alpha and Omega, I don't know. Probably not. Resurrected, arguable, okay? Did have two births, though, but maybe that's what they're talking about. But this amulet that this book and Acharya and Zeitgeist are so impressed by, well, let's see here. So this is an author named James Hannum, saying, oddly enough, the amulet isn't in the appendix of either of the books cited in the bibliography. On my next visit to London, I looked both these books up at the Warburg Institute and found the note in Guthrie's work. Oh, we got a Frazer and a Guthrie. Wow. That the amulet was believed to be a fake. In subsequent email correspondence through an intermediary, Peter Gandy eventually came clean. So this is a fake, all right? It's a fake. And Zeitgeist made a big deal of it, even though it's well-known fake, okay? So a chap that was making the rounds in alternative media about 10 years or so ago, Caesar's Messiah, Joseph Atwill, was working with Jan Irvin for a while, Jan Irvin, okay? Caesar's Messiah, the Roman conspiracy to invent Jesus. This is a lot of paraphrasing here, but this is from his website. To Atwill, it seemed incredible that two opposite forms of Messianic Judaism emerged at the same time. Why? Sectarianism is rife in any religion, particularly in Judaism. I mean, just watch that great scene in Monty Python. Sectarianism was rife. So this whole, just right off the bat, this argument is kind of weak. One sect waged war on Rome, seeking Messiah that would lead them to victory. Yet the followers of Jesus were organizing around a Messiah that told them to turn the other cheek and render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. The key for Atwill came in Josephus' War of the Jews with Titus's destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD CE. The campaign paralleled over 40 moments in Jesus' ministry described in the Gospels, an inconceivable coincidence. Atwill argues that the Flavians created Christianity to pacify opposition to their rule. They placed literary satire within the Gospels to mark their handiwork. His arguments they're just wacky to me. Again, the two opposite forms of Messianic Judaism. I mean, when did that not happen? I mean, that's just history. And this whole idea that the Romans created Christianity to pacify the Jews during the civil wars and all that kind of thing, that makes no sense at all, because Judaism and Christianity, even by that point, were pretty at odds. Just makes absolutely no sense. And people like Richard Carrier, because this book was so popular, get very, very upset when people ask him about this book. Now, here's an interesting thing. So again, I was around back in the 90s. I saw how a lot of these kind of ideas were circulating. Now, but there's a very interesting, I don't want to say origin, because there are Jesus mythicist books that precede this book that we're going to discuss here. But somehow this book put the idea into the thoughts of the public through evangelical Christianity that I think made strides, let's just say, in influencing mythicism, okay? Ironically, but we'll get into this book in just 1 second. The Two Babylons, proof that Roman Catholic beliefs came from pagan Babylonian religion. Alexander Hislop, okay? Scottish Presbyterian writer, okay? Two Babylons. Now, there are plenty of people in the Christian conspiracy realm, and even in relatively more mainstream streams of Christianity, that still cite this book as an authority, okay? Still cite this as an authority. The Two Babylons, subtitled Romanism and Its Origins and/or Papal Worship, proved to be the worship of Nimrod and his wife, was first published in 1853, authored by Presbyterian theologian Alexander Hislop, 1807 to 1865. Hislop draws on the pan-Babylonian school of hyperdiffusionism, I'll explain that in just a second, to argue that classical and ancient Near Eastern civilization took its inspiration from Babylon. From this, he derives the argument that the mystery religions of late antiquity were actually offshoots of one ancient religion founded at the Tower of Babel. Okay, so pan-Babylonianism is basically an argument saying that all of, I guess, the Western, Near Eastern, all of culture and society and beliefs and religion and literature and you name it, were all drawn from Babylon. Never mind the fact that Babylon came much after Sumer, but they didn't know about Sumer at the time. Hyperdiffusionism is basically an argument that ideas can be diffused, they can be spread throughout the world in ways that we don't understand, and they can be spread far and wide. Okay, so pan-Babylonian hyperdiffusionism, all right? So these are basically fringe theories, but they were theories that were very popular in the 1800s, all right? Hislop's work centers on his theories of the legendary king Ninus and his semi-historical wife Semiramis, with the biblical Nimrod as both her husband and her son, with the incestuous male offspring being Tammuz. So this is just completely wackadoodle. This is just drawing stuff out of nowhere, all right? So apparently Nimrod or Ninus, Nimrod is a biblical invention. Ninus and Semiramis didn't even exist at the same point in time, like just different centuries. So this is all, there's no basis for any of this. There's no record anywhere of Ninus and Semiramis being married. Hislop argues that all pagan gods in the ancient world ultimately derive from this family, this trinity, which was later adopted in part by Jesus Mythicists. So a lot of the arguments that he makes in this book, atheists still cite, including Jesus Mythicists. Okay, so this is a very strange secret origin, I think, of Jesus Mythicism. All right. The Two Babylons, the book, arose out of religious conflict. The Scottish Reformation, which began in 1560, deepened the divide between Catholics and Protestants. The Counter-Reformation period of the 16th and 17th centuries was marked by significant and religious and civil strife in Scotland, including the Marian oppressions under Mary Queen of Scots, where she was having Protestants rounded up and executed. Religious tensions eventually led to civil wars, including the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, 1639 to 1651. This period saw intense conflict between the Protestants and Catholics and was marked by the martyrdom of Protestant reformers executed for their beliefs. And Scotland, again, was a hotbed of this. I mean, all of the British Isles were, but particularly brutal in Scotland. Religious conflict was intertwined with political and social unrest. The Scottish nobility was divided along religious lines, with some supporting the Protestants and other remaining Catholic. And apparently the Highland Scots were Catholic, and the Lowland Scots, working in the factories and the whole Protestant work ethic, were Protestants, and that was the divide. The 18th and 19th centuries saw significant religious tension and conflict between Catholics and Protestants in Scotland. So this book is basically a work of propaganda. It's maybe Hyslop didn't even believe in all this stuff, but it is polemic. It is rhetoric, okay? The irony of it is the fact that despite the fact that so many of its claims are completely baseless, it still has a tremendous influence, all right? Some fundamentalist Protestants still use the Two Babylons as proof that the Roman Catholic Church is the continuation of the ancient Babylonian religion. Jehovah's Witnesses periodical The Watchtower, some of you might remember that, published excerpts from it until the 1980s. I believe the Worldwide Church of God did as well. Herbert W. Armstrong. Anti-Catholic evangelical publisher Jack Chick endorsed the book, and his store still offers it. Some Seventh-day Adventists still use the Two Babylons as source material. Now, here's where it gets interesting. David Icke incorporates Hyslop's claims about Semiramis into the book The Biggest Secret, claiming that Semiramis played a key role in the establishment of a global conspiracy run by reptilian aliens. Neo-pagans and atheists often cite Hyslop's theory of Easter being derived from Ishtar, which is false, as well as claiming Ishtar's symbols were the bunny and the egg, also false. Okay. He also made a number of false claims about Babylonian Christmas. Again, this book is not taken seriously by anybody but the fringe of the fringe, really. But among a lot of people on those fringes, it remains very highly influential. Okay, even though most of its claims can be very quickly disproven, but that doesn't matter with this kind of material. All right, we're dealing with polemic, we're dealing with propaganda, we are dealing with rhetoric, we are dealing with emotions, my friends. Emotions. This book was written out of an emotional imperative over the strife in Scotland over religion. All right. So that's the end of part 1. Okay, I'm just going to queue up part 2 here, and I'm going to just go into the chat just real quick. All right, give me just one sec, folks. I'm going to get the next installment opened up here. Jimmy's here, okay? Jimmy wanted to come to our party. All right, Jimmy. Okay, folks, part 2 of our Zeitgeist. Guys, excuse me, folks. I need to get rid of these little guys. Just 1 second. These dogs, I'm telling you. You know, I got to just close that door. Give me just 1 second. Nothing but the finest, high quality production values. Oh, those little dogs. They just want to be with their daddy. All right, so let's get into Christmas is Not Mithras, which is sort of the centerpiece here of this discussion. All right. And again, this is not going to be a long one. I'm not keeping you guys for long. I know everybody's got things to do and, you know, it's a very busy season, but let's just get into it. Christmas is not Mithras. So, a lot of people talk about the Saturnalia as being the basis for Christmas, okay? First century poet Gaius Valerius Catullus described Saturnalia as the best of times. Dress codes were relaxed. Now, this is the argument. Gifts such as dolls, candles, and caged birds were exchanged, okay? This originally took place on the 17th of December. Now, this is the end of the year in the calendar, so it's not unusual to have these kind of festivals and celebrations towards the end of the year. I mean, we see this in a lot of traditions, all right? Saturnalia saw the inversions of social roles. The wealthy were expected to pay the month's rent for those who couldn't afford it. Masters and slaves swapped clothes. Family households threw dice to determine who would become the temporary Saturnalian monarch. Wow, reminds me of the eclipse substitute king ritual. Saturnalia originated as a farmer's festival to mark the end of the planting season. Okay, so there's not any kind of connotation with the birth of a god. All right, it's just a harvest festival. Macrobius wrote of a banquet of literary celebrities in Rome during the festival. Classicists date the work, Macrobius's work, to between AD 383 and 430, so it describes a Saturnalia alive and well under Christian emperors. All right, there's a lot of misconceptions that, you know, once the church became the official religion of Rome, that it just became, you know, like the Taliban. That is just not true. It's just not true. Anyhow, the Christian calendar of Polymus Silvus, written around AD 449, mentions Saturnalia, recording that it used to honor the god Saturn. This suggests it had by then become just another popular carnival, which was very, very common for a lot of these sort of wild, kind of scary, to be frank. I mean, the Saturnalia did include human sacrifice in the early days. But a lot of these things just become very mainstream, okay? You know, just become public festivals, all right? So David Gwynn of the University of London argues that the majority of modern scholars would be reluctant to accept any close connection between the Saturnalia and the emergence of the Christian Christmas, okay? Different purposes, different celebrations. Really, the only similarities would be the giving of gifts and the time of year. But giving of gifts is, you know, not wasn't really part of Christmas for a very long time either. So there are a lot of very spurious connections that have been jumbled because of, not only the power of propaganda, but the power of ignorance. I mean, this is very similar, another one of my pet peeves being Project Bluebeam, which everybody who cites it hasn't read, but was all based on a lot of incorrect information as well as Star Trek plots. So let's get into Christmas. There's so many people to talk about who've written about this, who've written all the same things, made the same arguments based on the same inaccurate material. But let's do this guy because this gets into the psychology of it. Seth Andrews is an American activist, author, and speaker on the subject of atheism. He is the creator and host of The Thinking Atheist. Prior to his atheist activism, he was a fundamentalist Christian and had a 10-year career as a Christian radio host. All right. So he did a podcast on what Christmas really was. Nobody is quite as zealous and obnoxious as a convert. Okay. So he wants to, basically kill his darlings in order to appeal to the audience that he wants to appeal to. Unfortunately, he just spouts a bunch of nonsense. So this is quoting Andrews. Ancient Rome celebrated the solstice around the 25th of December. In fact, it said December 25th was the birthday of this invincible Persian sun god Mithra, which they called Mithras. So he doesn't even get that right. And it's true that Mithraism and Christianity have a lot of suspicious commonalities, which they don't. Mithra is at least 4,000 years old. Well, Mithra is. Again, I mean, people just jumble this stuff like crazy. That legend has changed and shaped its way from Persia and the Greeks and the Babylonians and beyond. And to signify the return of Mithra, or more accurately Mithras, they would light these wax taper candles, and they were gifted to other people who would then light the candles. The Christmas candle finds its roots among the ancient worshippers of the sun god Mithra. Totally false. Again, the Christian Christmas candle finds its roots among the ancient worshippers of the sun god Mithra. Totally false. Completely false. All right. And the Roman pagans would decorate their houses with wreaths and greenery, and it was believed that evergreens would keep away the forces of darkness, which is ghosts, evil spirits, even sicknesses and death. And so families would adorn their homes inside and out with pine and spruce and fir trees. They'd put evergreen boughs and they'd hang them over the door. Well, Christians did this and they were criticized by the church. There's absolutely no connection or evidence whatsoever that people who worshiped Mithra, as he's arguing here, did this. There's none, zero, zilch, okay? This is all completely fabricated, all right? He might not know that because he's probably just reading other atheist texts who are just regurgitating the same old Zeitgeist stuff, okay? So this former fundamentalist turned atheist is arguing that Christmas is just basically the birthday of the invincible sun god Mithra. Again, called Mithras in Rome. This is all nonsense. So let's get into why it's complete and total nonsense. But you will still hear this stuff to this day, okay? You will still see this stuff on social media. It is all completely baseless. So we have three different gods here. We have the Roman mystery cult of Mithra, okay, got to add the S in there. The Persian, Iranian, or Zoroastrian Mithra, okay, and the Vedic Mithra, okay. So we have Mithras, Mithra, and Mithra, all right. None of these match Christianity, and none of them arguably have much to do with each other. And again, I do not believe that Mithra is the sun. We'll show you why he isn't, but I believe that he is the constellation of Perseus, okay? Persia, Perseus, right? This is all stellar cultism, okay? And again, as I've talked about, we're going to have to do a whole thing on Mithraism, but I think this was a drug cult, a drug and sex cult. Now, here's the problem with these arguments, okay? The Romans were not indeed absolutely sure of which was the shortest day and longest night. Pliny, in the 1st century, put them at 26th of December. Well, Columella, writing around the same time, guessed at the 23rd. The official calendar of Julius Caesar marked them at the 25th, okay? The shortest day and the longest night. The uncertainty was perfectly natural, for at midwinter and midsummer at the solar orb does appear to rise and set in the same places for a few days. The very term solstice is taken from the Latin for the sun stands still. This is from Ronald Hutton, Stations of the Sun. So this guy is writing a book about sun worship, and he's arguing that the Romans were really not sure about this holiday, and this whole basis for December 25th is spurious. This is from another scholar. December 25th was neither a long-standing nor an especially important feast day of Sol. Okay, and this is from some of these screen caps I took from the excellent YouTube channel Religion for Breakfast, which I recommend to everybody if you want real scholarship on religion. So December 25th was not a long-standing nor an especially important official feast day of Sol. So this whole idea is false. Seth Andrews is making the idea that there's a feast day of Mithras, which is totally false. I mean, the Sol day is just partly false. The Mithras day is completely false. Our only record of this, though, comes from the chronograph of 354 AD. Now, this gets really interesting because the Religion for Breakfast chap, very, very smart chap, sort of went into the nitty-gritty of this and showed that the basis for December 25th as the birthday of Sol is very tenuous, okay? So this is 354. This is a point when the empire had already been Christianized, as we can see from these cherubim, all right? So there we go. Now, so the idea is that the birthday of Sol is called Natalis Sol Invictii, but Natalis could also mean festival day or temple dedication, okay? And another date that's more established for Sol is August 28th, a day that we've looked at pretty recently, Sol and Luna Festival, okay, being marked on that day, all right? These are the days from different sources that have been cited as the Natalis Sol Invictii, okay, the birthday of the conquerable sun, August 8th and 9th, August 28th, October 19th to the 22nd, December 11th, December 25th, okay? There is no set day. So this whole idea that this was this big, huge festival that everybody practiced and it was handed down or is absconded by the Christians has no basis in history whatsoever. And Mithras and Sol are two different figures. They are so often conflated, but they are two different figures, okay? Again, Sol is the sun and Mithras is the constellation of Perseus. And here we see them hanging out like just two guys do, you know, on a couch, naked, drinking wine, having some snacks, you know, just kind of a typical day. But they are two different gods. They are not the same figure. The fact that people like Seth Andrews, who claims to be so much smarter than everybody, cannot tell the difference, as many others cannot, is really, really annoying. It's just annoying. So this is Dr. Roger Beck, okay? In truth, the only evidence for December 25th being the celebration of the birthday of Invictus on that date is in the calendar of Philocalus. Invictus is, of course, Sol Invictus, Aurelian's sun god, which was also, by the way, a syncretism. It does not follow that a different, earlier, and unofficial sun god, Sol Invictus Mithras, was necessarily or even probably born on that day too. So again, these are two different figures. One's official, one's unofficial. There's no reason for these myths. They continue to this day. And even the barest scrap of historical evidence is stretched beyond all reason. All right? Now, Charles Dickens created the Christmas we know today. So Christmas has been practiced throughout the years, but it was never the big deal that it became in the Victorian era, okay? Christmas was banned at certain times in certain places. In Puritan, Massachusetts, it was banned, okay? It was not a huge deal until the rise of mercantile capitalism with the Industrial Revolution starting in England, okay? So, with the Oxford movement in the Anglican Church, a revival in the traditional rituals and observances associated with Christmas time occurred. This ushered in the development of richer and more symbolic forms of worship and the revival and increasing centrality of Christmas itself as a Christian festival, as well as special charities for the poor in addition to special services and musical events. Ronald Hutton, who we talked about before, believes the current observance of Christmas came from this revival, spearheaded by Charles Dickens, who linked worship and feasting within a context of social reconciliation. Historian Stephen Nissenbaum contends that the modern celebration in the United States was developed in New York from imagined Dutch and English traditions to refocus the holiday from one where groups of young men went house to house demanding alcohol and food into one centered on the happiness of children. So this is what is the name of that holiday? There's a holiday that's still practiced in the Maritimes up in Canada. What is it? Mummering? I think it's mummering. Which they seem to be describing here, where groups of young men went from house to house demanding alcohol and food, almost like Halloween in some ways. Christmas was not proclaimed a holiday by the United States Congress until 1870. Wow, very, very late, folks, okay? And it wasn't until the rise of mass, production in the 20th century that it took the shape that we know it today. So even the 19th century version of Christmas is somewhat different than what we see today. And of course, Santa Claus, aka Father Christmas, aka Saint Nick, was really an invention of the Coca-Cola company. I don't have time to go into it now, but the whole association with Odin that we still see to this day with Santa Claus is completely spurious. But it's it's a bit of a digression. Okay. So, in review, we have completely false information packaged in a very, very effective propaganda film. So effective that the misinformation, despite being exposed by numbers and numbers of YouTubers and bloggers, novelists, scholars, I mean, you name it, despite the fact that this information has been thoroughly debunked, it continues to this day. And one thing that I started to realize when working on this is that it reminded me that we are seeing almost like a postmodern version of Docetism, or the new Docetists. Who are these people? What is this all about? Docetism was a prominent belief within dualistic Gnosticism that believed that Jesus was an illusion. Remember we saw that in that, who was it? Wells. G.A. Wells talked about that, that Jesus was basically almost like a ghost based on Sophia. The word Docetism comes from the Greek word dokio, which means to seem. So something seems to be real, but is not. Docetists believe that Jesus was a pure spirit and did not have a physical body. They believe that Jesus' crucifixion, death, resurrection, and ascension were illusions, as do the Nu Mithicists, right? The Jesus Mythicists also believe that Jesus' crucifixion, death, resurrection, and ascension were illusions, right? Believing that Jesus never existed as a historical person but was cobbled together from other myths is nothing less than a new postmodern variety of Docetism, all right? I might be mispronouncing that. It might be Docetism, but it's probably Docetism. It's basically the same thing, but there's a very interesting psychology that continues to fascinate me to this day about this whole school of thought behind a lot of the atheism, which admittedly is not quite the presence that it once was, even 10 years ago. But I want to talk about some of the psychological, some of the psychological impetus behind this. We're losing some of our UK folks. Uh-oh. All right. Okay. Here we go. The psychology of ambivalence. This is something I think about when I read a lot of these Jesus mythicists. An approach avoidance conflict is a situation where someone is simultaneously drawn towards but also repelled by the same goal or option, meaning that it has both positive and negative aspects that create internal tension and make decision-making difficult. This manifests as a tug-of-war between wanting to approach something and wanting to avoid it at the same time. Now, just think about, how does this apply to Jesus mythicists? Well, they want to claim they don't believe, but they spend all their time studying Christian history, studying Gospels, studying all this information, So it's a very interesting phenomenon where you claim not to be interested in something that you spend all your time studying. The goal or situation elicits both positive and negative feelings, causing ambivalence and eternal struggle. I believe that a lot of these people are plagued by internal struggle, but most definitely Acharya. Unfortunately, I think it led to her illness, unfortunately. And I remember when that was going on, that was excruciating. That, I think it was liver cancer. It was very, very cruel, and it bankrupted her, and she had very little money to begin with. The whole thing was just horrible to watch back in the old Facebook days. Now, atheism, as we know it today, or knew it, is over. Okay, it's dead. I mean, even though, there are more atheists now today than ever before, but the philosophy, the movement, the atheist movement is dead. Everybody, or most people involved in it, understand that. This is the amazing atheist. Some of you might recognize. He did this video on the rise and fall of Nu Atheism, a forgotten relic. Atheism is cringe. The Nu Atheism, though, did, a lot of people don't realize this, but it was really how woke became inserted into the mainstream. We can do a live stream on that, but there was a movement called Atheism Plus, which the amazing atheist here does go into, that was really the, the carrier, the carrier for the woke mind virus, right? It was the vector for it. This is a history that a lot of people don't realize, but I should go into, because another carrier for the woke mind virus were the so-called stans, people, fandoms of Doctor Who or Supernatural or whomever. Now, I'm going to bungle this. This is a parable that I heard a long time ago. I don't remember if it was Alan Watts or somebody like that. And if you're familiar with this parable, please correct me, but I'm going to tell it to the best of my abilities here, okay? A man once told a priest, "I am an atheist. I do not believe in Brahma, Vishnu, or Krishna." The priest said, "Fine, now try this. Say, 'I do not believe in Brahma, Vishnu, or Krishna' for an hour every day until you die." The man did so, then died and found he ascended into paradise. He asked the Deva, "How am I here? I am an atheist." The Deva said, "You are here because you recited the names of God every day of your life." Please tell me, if I couldn't find the source for this, but it was a parable that stuck with me over the years. But it seemed like a very interesting corollary to the Jesus myth and to atheism as well, but particularly towards the Jesus myth movement, where you spend all your time focusing on this material that you do not believe in. And you kind of have to wonder, there is an influence of approach avoidance conflict. There's definitely some inner turmoil, I think, going on here. And that's why you have very, very smart people who should know better saying some foolish things. But conversion is a two-way street, okay? So we have a lot of, again, we have people drifting out of religion. The churches, almost en masse, are falling away, aging out, particularly your more mainstream churches are just on their last legs. You have a lot of online bros, Bible bros and so on, ortho bros. But I read a survey that said that most of them actually don't go to church. Anyhow, so this is an article, 50 Atheists Found Christ. This researcher found out why. Conversion is a two-way street. Christian blogger, the raving atheist, converts to Christianity. Well, actually, it should be atheist blogger, the raving atheist. And he changed his name to the raving theist, okay, converts to Christianity. Somali refugee Alia Ersan Ali was a major figure in Christopher Hitchens' Nu Atheist push in the early 2000s, also converts to Christianity, all right? Anthony Flew, a very well-known atheist from back in the day, converted to Christianity. There is a God, how the world's most notorious atheist changed his mind, all right? Now, a lot of people are atheist or agnostic or don't even think about it. They're just not. They're just none. That's different than the people who become atheist activists. The people who become atheist activists, it's like they want to continue to, get their high, get their fix, but they don't want to admit to it, okay? John Wise, finding God after 25 years as an atheist professor. The atheist movement is dead. And, no offense to anyone who might be an atheist, but a lot of atheists are just total assholes. And, it's not a group that you want to associate with, let's just say. Jan Irving was a Jesus mythicist celebrity, or an internet celebrity, or alt media celebrity who later converted to Mormonism, changed the name of Gnostic media to Logos Media. His big book back in the day was Astrotheology and Shamanism, Christians' Pagan Roots, Jan Irving and Andrew Rutait, or Rutajet, however that's pronounced. So he went from being straight up Christ myther, Jesus mythicist, to becoming a Mormon, which is a very interesting change, a little unexpected. Not becoming a Catholic or so on, as most people would do, or an evangelical. Ethics, mathematics, and the Rosary, an ex-atheist discussed her conversion. Atheist and blogger Leah Labresco-Sargent was convinced of Catholicism's truth after a rigorous intellectual journey. I remember this was a very, very big deal. This was at the height of the Nu Atheist movement, And this poor woman got a lot of hate, really got a lot of heat. It was very brave of her, I think, but there you go. Jonathan Noyes, another atheist blogger type, Why I Left Atheism for Christianity. So again, I think that atheism, rather than non-theism, let's just distinguish atheism, the movement, from non-theism. I think that people who are actively atheists or activist atheists, they have a bone to pick. They have something bothering them. There's something going on. This isn't just, intellectual curiosity. So this is why I'm very interested in the psychology of it. And I think this plays in. I think if you look at a lot of the people who still post a lot of the Zeitgeist nonsense, probably a lot of them grew up in, very strict religious environments, or at least like evangelical or whatever. Because I think what Jesus mythicism is it's an attempt to exorcise Jesus from yourself. And I would argue that was a large driver with Acharya, okay? And certainly others. I find it interesting that Robert Price had gotten so much, let me just see here, gotten so much paper, let's just say, spent so much time studying to be a minister and a theologian, and then just sort of drops out. It's something seems to be driving that, okay? And when you become an activist, it's still bothering you. And this is why I'm saying that I believe that this movement is an attempt to exorcise Jesus from people who still talk about this stuff, despite the fact that it's been conclusively proven to be untrue for many, many years now. So let's look at Mythicism's Achilles heels, okay? I think there are some very important holes in the story, okay? At least from my point of view. I'm sure a lot of people would quibble, but I'm just going to tell you how I see it. But this is scholarship. Let's start with this. The dying rising gods that we hear so much about in all of this Jesus mythicist material. There's no unanimous agreement among scholars about who fits into this category, with many arguing that the dying rising theme is overgeneralized or misapplied. Reminds me of Gnosticism, right? Some argue for a narrower definition focused on literal death and physical return to life, while others see it more broadly, including seasonal cycles. The myth interpretations vary greatly depending on the cultural context, the period of the myth's development, and how they were enacted. While these gods are often discussed in the context of dying and rising, the exact fit of each figure into this category remains a subject of debate. All right, so scholars do not agree on what basically was introduced into the lexicon by the Golden Bough, James Frazer. Now, back to Richard Carrier. So again, Richard Carrier is a very, very interesting guy, but he also, I think he's a very honest guy. I might disagree with him, but he's not one of these ridiculous hucksters that you see so much of on YouTube these days. Richard Carrier was named has named the following examples of dying and rising gods in his writings. Now, I want you to pay attention to this. So this is Richard Carrier, who has all the credentials for Jesus mythicism, but his list is very interesting. So Osiris, Dumuzi, Tammuz, Adonis, Attis, Baal, Zalmoxis, and Inanna Ishtar as what he considers to be dying, rising gods. Now, please notice that only 2 of those figures are in Zeitgeist. No, I'm sorry, 1, just 1, just Attis. Adonis, I don't believe Adonis is in there. So of what he calls the dying and rising gods, only 1 is listed, in the works of people like Acharya S, and that is Attis. I mean, Attis and Adonis are pretty similar. I think they're basically the same figure with just a little bit different mythologies. But how interesting, there's no mention of Osiris, Tammuz, Baal, Zalmoxis, or Inanna in Zeitgeist, even though this scholar believes that they are the only true figures that you could argue are dying, rising gods. Acharya argues a broader interpretation where the death might not always be literal or physical, and the rising might symbolize rejuvenation, rebirth, or return rather than a strict resurrection as in the Gospels. So you could argue that even these figures, of all the dying and rising gods, even these figures are not truly dying and rising. So, or, in the sense of, Christ's bodily resurrection in the Gospels. So very, very interesting. Let's talk about Euhemerism. Euhemerism is a theory in mythology that interprets myths as accounts of real historical events or people. Euhemerism suggests that myths are created when historical accounts are exaggerated and altered over time to reflect cultural values. We see this all the time. This is always happening, okay? This is not a speculative process. This is observable. The theory posits that gods were original great people who were venerated for their benefits to humanity. The theory is named after the Greek mythographer Euhemeris, who lived around 300 BCE. It was articulated in his travel narrative, Sacred Inscription. All right? So, there we go. Now, getting into the whole idea of religions being altered over time to reflect cultural values. Every religion exists in a time and place, okay? Every religion has always been influenced by its environment, influenced by other religions, influenced by secular culture, and this goes back all the way. One example that we can cite here. So borders between religions were porous in 2nd century Alexandria, which was a hotbed of Gnosticism, but also Christianity and Judaism. Something Emperor Hadrian commented on in a letter to a friend. I'm going to read you this letter. The land of Egypt, the praises of which you have been recounting to me, my dear Servianus, I have found to be wholly light-minded, unstable, and blown about by every breath of rumor. There those who worship Serapis are in fact Christians, and those who call themselves the bishops of Christ are in fact devotees of Serapis. There is no chief of the Jewish synagogue, no Samaritan, no Christian. Oh, the Samaritans were still around. That's interesting. No Christian presbyter who is not an astrologer, a soothsayer, or an anointer. Even the patriarch himself, when he comes to Egypt, is forced by some to worship Serapis, by others to worship Christ. So the patriarch would be the head of the church in Rome. They are folk most seditious, most deceitful, most given to injury, but their city is prosperous, rich, and fruitful, and in it no one is idle. Okay? So basically what he's saying is that it's just a jumble. Jews, Christians, pagans, Samaritans, Gnostics are all living cheek by jowl, all competing with each other for adherence, all being influenced by each other. Now, this is how you can account for a lot of the symbolism and liturgy in Christianity. But this does not disprove that Jesus was a real human being. And that's the argument that I'm making here. I'm not going into theology. I'm not going into Christology or anything like that. My only concern is this argument that Jesus was fictitious, which I believe is entirely false, okay? Entirely false. It's bad history. Apotheosis is the glorification of a person to divine levels. Apotheosis was common in many ancient religions and some active today. It requires a belief that there is a possibility of newly created gods, so a polytheistic belief system often applies, or a henotheistic belief system. And this is the apotheosis of the Emperor Antonius Pius, okay? Raised to godhood. Now, did that mean, would somebody look at this display here and see a human being with wings rising to the level of the gods and being blessed by Minerva and so on, and say, well, that means that Antonius Pius didn't exist? right? Is that the argument that we can make from that? How about this one? The apotheosis of Washington depicts George Washington exalted in the heavens and surrounded by figures from classical mythology. So we're going to make that argument here? Is this the argument we're going to make, that since we see George Washington up in the heavens with all these gods, and there's the goddess Liberty, and I see the trident of Poseidon and all these different figures, and we see him up on Mount Olympus, basically. Does that mean George Washington didn't exist? Because he's clearly taking this imagery that we see here from other figures, right? I mean, this is probably like George Washington as Hercules, isn't it? So if George Washington is depicted as Hercules ascending to Mount Olympus and reaching his apotheosis, does that mean that George Washington never existed? This is the argument that the Jesus mythicists are making. This is the basic argument that they're making. How about this one? Now, I don't know. I'm not having been too well versed in 19th century American history, but I'm pretty sure that Abraham Lincoln never was beamed up by the Starship Enterprise and hung out with Kirk and Spock and fought aliens on some distant planet. All right. Now, does this image here of Abraham Lincoln with Kirk and Spock mean that Abraham Lincoln didn't exist? Does this mean that he's fictional? How about Abraham Lincoln vampire hunter? Okay, so people told stories. People told stories about Abraham Lincoln, right? As, on the Starship Enterprise and as a vampire hunter. Does that mean that Abraham Lincoln wasn't real? That's the argument. That is exactly the argument that people like Acharya are making. Because there's all this cultural influence that comes in usually much later, and in the case of Christianity comes in much, much later, at least 100 years later. Does that mean that that Jesus wasn't real? I mean, this is the same argument that they're making here. Queen Victoria, was she a demon hunter? All right. Probably not. She loved her country. She hated zombies. All right. Does this invalidate the reality of Queen Victoria as a person? How about Billy the Kid versus Dracula? Now, Billy the Kid, William Bonney, was a real human being, okay? Gunfighter in New Mexico, Lincoln County War. As far as I know, he never battled Dracula, who I believe was based on Vlad the Impaler, but Bram Stoker's Dracula. Does this mean, because we see a film of Billy the Kid versus Dracula, this means that Billy the Kid never existed? It's the same argument. Again here, Jesse James meets Frankenstein's daughter. Jesse James was a real human being. Did he ever meet Frankenstein's daughter? Not that I'm aware of. I believe that Frankenstein's daughter doesn't exist and is based in a fictional character anyway. Does this film invalidate the existence of Jesse James, right? Reagan's Raiders. As far as I know, Ronald Reagan didn't don spandex and run around with automatic rifles, rescuing MIAs from the jungles of Laos and Cambodia. Does this mean that Ronald Reagan was fictitious, was a myth? Because people are mythologized long after they're dead and long after the people who originally knew them are dead, does that mean that they are fiction? Because that is the argument that people are making in Jesus mythicism, all right? Ex-presidents. I worked on the graphic novel for this, right? Does this mean, because these four men are depicted in a superhero cartoon, that they didn't exist? Well, Ronald Reagan, he's clearly based on, Cyclops. And Gerald Ford's based on Giant Man or The Thing or somebody. And Jimmy Carter's based on some other character. Since these guys are all playing the roles of these other characters, does that mean they didn't exist? Okay. No, it doesn't. It's bad logic. Why I am not a mythicist. All right. Why I am not a mythicist. I'm just seeing here. All right. All right. Here we go. Why I'm not a mythicist. Now this is some of these arguments I'm going to make are interesting arguments that I haven't seen, but I always go back to original sources and I start to notice things. Let's first get into Robert Price's arguments as to the mythology of Christ. There is no mention of a miracle working Jesus in secular sources during his life. During his life. Afterwards, there were. So he's basically, the wording here is a little deceptive. But I would argue here the region, Judea, the Galilee, Samaria, I mean, these areas in the Middle East, in the Levant, were filled with itinerant preachers and miracle workers. There was no reason for one to be recorded by authorities except for when he was noticed by someone who could write. That someone being a Roman bureaucrat who probably couldn't tell any of these characters apart. Okay? And there's reason to believe that Jesus was also leading a political rebellion, an insurrection, and that alone would be cause for him to be written out of history. So, even the Gospels mostly have Jesus' ministry in the countryside, right? And we have the entry into Jerusalem and so on, and the incident of the temple and everything. Who would notice this? Who? This is we don't have the internet, we don't have newspapers, we don't have television. If somebody's going around the countryside, outside of the Roman garrisons, preaching to the people, nobody who's going to write anything down would notice this. The epistles, so this is Price again, the epistles written earlier than the Gospels provide no evidence of a recent historical Jesus. Price argues that all the epistles say is that a Son of God lived in a heavenly realm, died as a sacrifice for human sin, was raised and enthroned in heaven. So I say what this tells us is that Jesus was the Elvis of his day and was instantly mythologized as soon as he died. This, in fact, speaks to the power and effective of Jesus' ministry, not to mention his charisma and magnetism, seeing that he was deified even before the Gospels are written. Okay? And don't forget that it cost money to, scribes were well-paid professionals, all right? Papyrus was expensive. Ink was expensive. Pens were expensive. A lot of these people at that time in that place didn't have the money to write a book, okay? It was a different time, all right? So these arguments do not hold water for me, and I just don't understand the logic of them, okay? I mean, there's no mention of a miracle-working Jesus contemporary in secular sources, but why would there be, is what I'm saying. Why would there be? Again, this argument that I think we thoroughly dispense with, the Jesus narrative is paralleled in Middle Eastern myths about dying and rising gods. Price names Baal, Osiris, Attis, Adonis, and Tammuz as examples, all of which have survived into the Hellenistic and Roman periods and thereby influenced early Christianity. Okay, well, maybe. I mean, again, influences creep in. People are influenced by things like this when they're real people. People LARP, right? Today, people go to conventions and do live action role play, okay? People are influenced by their environment. People respond to their environment. If these religions are in the environment, they're going to influence other religions positively or negatively, okay? So my argument to that is not really. Jesus died and rumors soon spread among his followers that he rose from the dead, a not uncommon reaction to such a trauma. Having studied the mystery religions in earnest, I can tell you with certainty that the gospel stories and the mystery dramas just are not that similar. And that's putting it mildly. The mystery stories are a lot more psychedelic. So when you read the stories, the mystery stories, they're not presented in this documentary fashion as we see in the Gospels, all right? It's just a completely different mindset. And trying to draw these parallels because of these very vague parallels or vague similarities just does not hold water for me. It just doesn't. This is very important, though. The criterion of embarrassment, all right? Now, this is something that scholars rely on. The criterion of embarrassment is a historical analysis method that biblical scholars use. It is based on the idea that authors are less likely to include details embarrassing or damaging to their beliefs. For instance, the crucifixion of Jesus is considered an embarrassing event for early Christians, so its inclusion in the Gospels supports its historical authenticity. Crucifixion was brutal, all right? It was brutal. It was meant to humiliate and to degrade and to basically erase you. It was a humiliating public torture that was meant to just basically destroy everything about you, all right? This was not something that you would brag about, all right? The criterion of embarrassment is one of several criteria used to evaluate the historical reliability of the Gospels, along with the criterion of dissimilarity, the criterion of multiple attestation, and the criterion of cultural and historical congruency. Now, again, I'm not trying to make theological arguments. I have no interest in that. This isn't apologetics. I'm not trying to evangelize or defend the Christian faith or anything like that. This is about, it's just basically about history. And it's basically about not falling for bad ideas and for bad narratives and for bad systems of argument. This is about, this is useful for us because this is about discernment, all right? And sometimes the people who claim to be discerning are not actually discerning. They're also driven by emotion and needs and wants and personality and so on and so forth, right? Now, this is something that I noticed quite a long time ago. The criterion of embarrassment comes through in the Gospels when looking at how they treat John the Baptist. Mark, the earliest gospel, or believed to be the earliest gospel, acts as if Jesus never existed until he met John, adding credence to the theory that Jesus may have arrived on the scene, in Judea, to follow the Baptist, okay? Now, this is very interesting, and this is something that I noticed. It just stood out like a sore thumb to me. So you're reading the Gospel of Luke, right? The majority of Luke chapter 1 is focused on John and his parents, Zechariah and Elizabeth. The majority of Luke chapter 3 is focused on John's ministry and teachings. Luke pays special attention to John's story and acknowledges that John wasn't quite sure about Jesus. So again, the criterion of embarrassment. John is very equivocal in the Gospel of Luke about Jesus Christ, okay? As I wrote previously, the Gospel writer Luke seems to be aware that he is writing for a people that believe that John and not Jesus was the Messiah, as we see in Josephus, right, in the Wars of the Jews. Some believe that Luke was writing before the fall of Jerusalem and before the death of the Apostle Paul, and that a first draft may have been produced circa 64 AD. So this is 30 years after, what's believed to be the death of Christ. Therefore, the first chapter of Luke acknowledges the supremacy of John in his audience's mind by telling his story first. So this gospel, right, which is meant to propagate belief in Jesus, is telling John's story first, okay? That's very, very interesting. Now, John's teachings, as spelled out in Luke, are basically Jesus' teachings, okay? The teachings are, I would argue, interchangeable. All of this may speak to the fact that Luke was trying to sway a large and skeptical audience that was intimately familiar with John's teachings and that saw Jesus as a usurper, which we know historically was true. Note that John does not identify Jesus as the coming Messiah in the book of Luke. This is remarkable for a gospel story and is in direct contradiction to the accounts of Matthew and John, okay? Could it be that John the Baptist's large following was very familiar with his messianic prophecies? Given the detailed account of John's biography in Luke's Gospel, it is very likely there were once written records of John's life and works, from which Luke, the Gospel writer, is quoting, particularly in the 3rd chapter. If Jesus were a wholly invented character, none of this would have been necessary. Okay? None of this would have been necessary. So what I'm trying to argue here is because the author of Luke goes to so much great detail to, I would argue, placate the followers of John, that argues against Jesus being mythical, because there would still be people alive who remembered Jesus. Luke seems to be working to kosher Jesus with John's remaining followers who might have been cold to Jesus and his movement, which is my interpretation, having read the Gospels. What is especially unusual about the Gospel accounts is that Jesus is almost universally scorned by Jewish authorities, who hardly even offer a grudging admiration of the man or his work. Okay, so aside from the notable example of Paul, the Pharisee, let's get into how he's described in the Gospels, mind you, as being seen by Jewish authorities. Not only is Jesus attacked as a sorcerer, which was the majority opinion among Jewish and Roman commenters after his death, he's called a glutton, a lunatic, a drunkard, and is attacked for the company he keeps. Sinners, probably meaning sexual sinners sinners, probably meaning sexual sinners of various types, and tax collectors in the Gospels themselves. Okay, this again is the criterion of embarrassment, that the people around Jesus, particularly people in authority, have disdain for him. Who would write that in a hagiography, all right, or in what you intend to be a new mythos? You don't write things like that. You see that, the people around Jesus, both Roman and Jewish, had a very poor opinion of him. Even Jesus' own brothers thought he had gone off the grid theologically. This is quoting from John. But when the Festival of Tabernacles was near, Jesus' brothers said to him, "Leave Galilee and go to Judea, so that your disciples there may see the works you do. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world." This is a taunt, okay? Because for even his own brothers did not believe in him. So they're not saying, go show the world what you're capable of. They're saying, yeah, come on, let's see what you got. Yeah, go show them. Go to Judea and see how that goes, right? This is a taunt. So his own brothers not only don't believe in him, they're making fun of him. Why would you write that? Think about it. This is extremely unlikely for a fictional hagiography. If somebody's trying to write propaganda, fictional propaganda, you do not say these things, because these things are demeaning, okay? This is the criterion of embarrassment. Okay, we're coming into the home stretch, folks, all right? Coming into the home stretch. I'm going to talk about what I believe the evidence tells us. And again, I'm not going to make any theological or cosmological or Christological claims here. That's not what I'm about. I'm just going to tell you what I believe the evidence, my interpretation of evidence, haven't studied this for quite some time, what I believe we can learn about Jesus the man from the evidence at hand. I believe that Jesus was an itinerant preacher in 1st century Judea. He was baptized by John the Baptist and was probably part of his entourage for a time. He began preaching a new kingdom, the kingdom of God on earth. So he had a new religious idea, okay, this idea of the kingdom of God on earth. He came to the attention of the authorities, Jews for blasphemy and sorcery, and Romans for sedition, okay? Very, very serious crimes. Was crucified for those crimes, probably during Passover week. Most of his followers drifted away after crucifixion, which is understandable and perfectly human. The remnant of his following identified as Jews, and we see this in Acts and so on, and some of the epistles. John's followers, John the Baptist's followers, were critical of Jesus and his movement. The Gospels were written as a way to defend Jesus against criticisms from John's movement. Okay, so certainly Luke. I think there's definitely an effort. Well, I guess in the Synoptics as a whole, to kosher Jesus with John's following, because I believe that there was a corpus of literature that was being circulated based on John's teachings, and that the people who followed him, the people who Josephus said that the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70 was God's punishment for rejecting John, not Jesus. Okay, citations in Luke give the strong impression that there was a corpus of John literature. Okay, I think these things can be attested either through inference or through the actual text. Paul, aka Saul, a Pharisee, had a conversion experience and became a follower of Jesus. Okay, he had conflicts with Jesus' apostles, the other apostles, and Stephen, one of Jesus' brothers, and began preaching to the Gentiles. So he's having conflicts with these apostles who still see themselves as Jews. And he says, well, no, this is a new thing. We've got a new thing here. This whole idea of the kingdom of God and so on. So he begins preaching this to the Gentiles. Roman authorities had some interest in using Paul to foment division. Again, the criteria of embarrassment, where we see like the Praetorian Guard inserting themselves into these stories. I mean, that's a little weird, okay? But I think that shows that they had some interest in using Paul to foment division. Several messiahs had emerged over the years, mostly aligned with the Zealots, Simon Bar Kokhba, and I guess the Maccabees would be earlier. I mean, there were a lot of people who rose up and were said to be pretenders to the throne of Messiahdom, I guess you could say. I don't know. I'm sort of tripping over my tongue here, but there were a lot of people who claimed to be messiahs who were in large part associated with these armed bands of zealots. Troubles with Jewish nationalists led to wars with Rome and an apocalyptic destruction of the temple and the resulting diaspora. So this was, everybody says, well, there was no apocalypse. There was, all this stuff didn't happen. Well, yeah, it did in AD 70. Believe me, that was an apocalypse, to those people at that time. There is no reason to disbelieve that followers kept a record of Jesus' teachings. Okay, there's no reason to believe that. Maybe on papyrus, clay tablets, if papyrus or something was too expensive, I don't know. But there's no good reason to disbelieve that these records weren't being kept contemporaneously of Jesus' teachings. Prototypes for the Gospels began appearing in the mid-1st century, followed by the Apostles' letters or the epistles, and then finally the Synoptic Gospels. So this whole argument that these things are emerging, the Gospels themselves emerged, I guess the earliest date would be 64 AD, 30 years after Jesus' death. But again, there's no reason to believe that these writings weren't being circulated earlier in different forms, and we do know of prototypes for the Gospels. The Jesus movement was very small for a very long time. Official repression of Christians was limited and sporadic. Most horror stories that you hear in hagiographies are just religious propaganda. Prohibitions on abortion, promiscuity, and homosexuality helped the Christian movement to outbreed its rivals, basically. They won the War of the Cradle. Constantine admired the discipline and unity of the Roman Church and used it to try to keep together a splintering empire. Rome used his patronage to crush, the Bishop of Rome used his patronage to crush all the competing Christian groups, from the proto-Orthodox or semi-Orthodox to the more Gnostic groups. Okay, so once they had the emperor on their side, they were free to sort of do away with the competition. But even still, that was never as thorough as we're led to believe. We're led to believe that because there's this whole idea that texts would be destroyed, where really what would happen is that they just wouldn't be copied. If you wanted to repress a particular religious text, you would just order all the copying houses not to make copies of it, okay? Right. So that's what I believe about Jesus. Again, I'm not trying to make any theological or supernatural claims here. I'm just talking about what I see can be proven from the evidence at hand. Now, what do I believe about Jesus' mythicism? This is maybe the more interesting question. Mythicism is often used in service to politically oriented and or fringe causes, right? Atheist fringes, certain political sects, and so on. Mythicism is attractive to believers in a state of disenchantment. So people who are drawn to mythicism and some of these ideas are disenchanted for one reason or another. And it doesn't have to be because of anything drastic or dramatic. They are just disenchanted, they're disillusioned. Mythicism is usually a function of disaffected believers trying to exercise their faith. And this is what I said before. When you see these people with all these Christian credentials writing all this Jesus didn't exist stuff, it's an attempt to exercise their own attachment to Jesus rather than ours. Okay. Mythicism is essentially a Christian heresy, a way for alienated believers to stay engaged with Christianity. Okay. And I guess, when people convert to a religion and they spend all their time attacking their old religion or, their old somebody was like a drug crazed rock and roller and they convert and they spend all their time talking about how horrible rock and roll is. I mean, this is all very, very common and understandable human psychology. Mainstream religious scholars and historians almost unanimously reject Jesus' mythicism in the fact that they don't buy the whole story that this whole movement just popped up out of nowhere based on nothing. That's another thing that doesn't make sense. Movements almost always arise based on a charismatic leader. Okay. Movements just don't arise from mythology, all right? There's always a charismatic persona at the core of it. Historical figures, especially heroic ones, were heavily mythologized or apotheosized, whatever the term is. So I think this is a Christian heresy. This is a way for people who are disenchanted with the church to still stay in the water, so to speak. Finally, what do I believe about Acharya? Again, I did not know her that well, but she did write a very nice preface, or a nice blurb, I should say, for one of my books, which I was very, very grateful for. But having had some contact with her and also having read a lot of her material, almost all of it, and listened to a lot of her interviews and stuff, I've come to these conclusions. Acharya was brilliant, incredibly intelligent woman, but very, very angry about something that we might never know. We might never know what it was, but she had a very personal beef with the church, possibly as a result of trauma or some type of abuse or crisis. All right. I don't believe this is just a question of disenchantment with her. I think that something happened to her that hurt her, that she was trying to get revenge for. Okay. Stoking her inner rage ultimately sickened and possibly killed her. This is not speculation as to how staying in a fit of rage on a permanent basis can ravage your immune system, ravage it. The Christ Conspiracy, her first book, was mostly drawing on long refuted Victorian-era misinterpretations of ancient texts and recent archaeology, or then recent archaeology. She knew better. I believe she knew better. But again, I think this was revenge. She was trying to strike back at something that she perceived hurt her. We probably never know what it was, but to me it's tragic because she was brilliant. No meaningful narrative connections exist between Jesus and any of the God figures claimed in Christ Conspiracy or in Zeitgeist. Okay, no meaningful narrative connections exist between Jesus and any of the God figures. If you don't believe me, just go read the stories. Just go back to the source material. The Jesus stories are nothing like any of those stories, okay? Any of them. They're all clearly mythological. A lot of them are astronomical, okay? There's no points of comparison between the story of Horus and the story of Jesus. And to claim otherwise is just absurd, okay? I mean, it's a non-starter. And the fact that this still persists to this day is very, very frustrating to me. And hopefully we can start a conversation. I mean, again, a lot of people have debunked Zeitgeist, all right? But I don't think they really focused on some of the inner workings of this belief system, all right? All right, so that's what we got, folks. That's what we got. 2 hours worth, all right? So I'm going to pop into the chat and see what people are saying. If you're still watching, I'm just monitoring the chat here, just trying to see what's going on. We lost all our European friends, but I'm glad they came anyway. And again, anybody who dipped out can watch the archive, which will be up as soon as this is over. I really don't know why I get so congested when I do these things. Is it psychosomatic? I don't know. It's so weird. Yeah, Josh. Again, the archive will be up immediately, so don't you worry none. Julia's over on Patreon. She just wanted to let us know that she's here. Said excellent show. Thank you very much. Well, let me pop back to YouTube now. So Glenn goes, do you see atheism growing, shrinking, or staying about the same within society, considering the world today? I It depends on how you define atheism. I think that the atheist movement has already waned. I think that people are drifting away from churches, synagogues, whatever. I think, but a lot of them are sort of landing on witchcraft and all these other kind of things. You just there's no such thing as a secular society. It doesn't exist. It never has existed. It's just a question of what type of religion you're going to follow. Just because says it's funny to me, I used to quote Zeitgeist, all that stuff about how Jesus and the 12 apostles were the same as Buddha or Horus or whatever, to my uncle, and now he quotes it back to me better than I. Oh, see, this is what again, there's been plenty of debunkings of it. People have talked about it, but I just don't think they've really gotten to the core of what this is all about and why I think it sort of needs to be exposed. Vanna Traditionalist says Jesus was real and a complex figure like anyone. His followers focus on the aspect that resonate for them. Hippie Jesus, politician Jesus, Revolutionary War Jesus, etc. Yeah, it's kind of like almost like a tabula rasa for some people. Remember some way to just. I don't understand the. I'm trying to get the. So Zeitgeist was presented so well as fact, carved in concrete. Again, it's an outstanding piece of propaganda. Thank you very much, CJ. Thank you, appreciate it. And again, was it James? I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names. Terrible with names. Okay. Okay, I'm getting so congested. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just like talking for 2 hours that it drives me out, I guess. Oh, anyway. What about the 12 apostles being the 12 zodiacs? Old Bibles had the symbols of a bull, Taurus, Luke, Matthew, water bearer, Aquarius, Book of John, eagle, and Mark, a lion. Well, those are the four. That's from Judaism. I mean, that's the Book of Daniel, right? The four living creatures. Is it Daniel or is it Isaiah? That predates. That's the 12 tribes of Israel. So you could make an argument that these apostles were pointed to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. What's up in England? Oh, so Janet says, I have an interesting theory that his name was always Jesus, not a Hebrew name. Yeah, I mean, people were speaking. First of all, there's zero evidence that he ever went by Yeshua or any of those names. Okay, everything is always some version of the Greek, and people spoke Greek back then. I'm actually. I don't think that Jesus spoke Aramaic as a first language. I think that of course, Eamon Hillman would agree because he's a big Greek guy, but I think that the Gospels are written in Greek. I don't think they spoke Aramaic. The lingua franca, the universal language of the empire was Greek. Okay, I and don't forget that Galilee was the Galilee of the Gentiles, so you had a lot of obviously Greek influence there. There's no evidence that he ever went by Yeshua or any of these other names, which is just kind of like pretentious boomer stuff to me. I think most of these characters went by their Greek names because that was just the practice. That was the common, that was the lingua franca, so to speak, at the time. Have I talked before how Jesus could have been Greek potentially? Well, I think it's very highly likely that he was Egyptian. That he was an Egyptian Jew from Alexandria, which means he would have spoken Greek. There's the whole thing of out of Egypt. Again, I don't want to get into the weeds with all this stuff because you'll never get out of it, right? I mean, my basic argument here was that I think that the core of the gospel stories is true. I'm not going to make any arguments or claims about all the other stuff, but I'm just talking. What I mentioned, what I listed as being true. As far as the other stuff, I mean, it's just I don't know, but I think it's because I mean there are records, not exactly contemporaneous, but there are records from antiquity that that he was accused of being an Egyptian, and that was why the flight out of Egypt story was sort of concocted and everything. There were a lot of Jews in Alexandria. I mean, it was I don't know if it was it was like at least a third Jewish. So it would not be uncommon or unheard of or in any way controversial, for a Jew to travel to Judea from Alexandria to follow a guru. I mean, we see this stuff all the time, everywhere in the world. Raj says, back then, I think the moment somehow steps into the cultural conversation in such a dramatic way, their spiritual life instantly becomes deeply political. War and control systems. Yeah. Well, see, that's... I hate religion and politics being intertwined, and it's just becoming more and more common. I just, as soon as politics enters into the sphere of religion, I leave the room, and I think that a lot of this, again, the sort of Bible bro, ortho bro, all this kind of stuff you're seeing online and social media, I think a lot of it is LARPing, it's a kind of a LARP, but it's a LARP based on like a political thing. It's like it's too political. It doesn't, and I've talked about this over the years that I just really don't have time for politicized religion. It just doesn't speak to me. It turns me off. There was a Jewish quarter in Alexandria. Yeah, a very large one. Jews were a very large presence in that city. So, and we didn't go into the therapeutes and Philo. So everybody talks about the Essenes, but nobody talks about the therapeutes, and the fact that there was, that if you really want to look at Jewish immediate predecessors to the Jesus movement, I think that, Philo and the therapeutes, I think fit the bill a little bit more than the Essenes, because the Essenes were separatists, all right? Jesus's ministry in the Galilee and Judea was public. They were itinerants. They traveled from city to city. The Essenes were separatists. So I don't really kind of see that as, I think they obviously had similar beliefs and that whole time period, right? But of course, the therapeutes were monastic, but there you go. I don't know. These are all kind of discussions that you could just spend the rest of your life involved in, which isn't really my my ambition here. What I'm really more fascinated in is the power of propaganda and why it appeals to people. We've had this whole thing, you've probably seen the whole thing with like the flat earth guy who went down to Antarctica and, said, I refute everything that I've said about flat earth. And it's like, well, and I've always said that, the flat earth model doesn't really work for me, but there are a lot of questions about geography and all these other things that, the flat earthers have raised that I do think are valid. They're at least they're interesting. That doesn't mean I buy into the flat earth model because I can't wrap my head around it. It doesn't work for me. But I think it does raise interesting questions about what we're taught about the cosmos, what we're taught about the solar system. There might be a lot of things that we're taught that just simply aren't true. And you create something like a flat earth to stop, a flat earth movement to keep people from asking those kind of questions. I believe that the flat earth, not the movement because it's very old, but I think the sort of the psyop that we're seeing now, I think it was created by NASA. Was Acharya a follower of Rajneesh at one point? That's a good question. I'll have to look that up. I have that book. I just got the book with all the interviews with her, so I'll let you know when I do read that. It's been a long time, this stuff is like 15 years ago for me. But it wouldn't surprise me. She did take the name Acharya, right, which is based in it's like teacher or something in Hindu, Sanskrit or something. Oh, alrighty. So we missed the bottom of the hour, so we're gonna have to a couple more minutes. Any more questions? Any more? What are my thoughts on the Gnostic Nag Hammadi texts? Well, I think I've always been kind of clear that it's fanfic to me. That's basically how I see it. It's something that I didn't really have the context for until all this fanfic sort of arose over the internet over the past 30 years. I know that sounds kind of demeaning, but that's basically how I see it. And I've said so for some time. So I think a lot of that material is just impossible to understand. It's just impossible to parse. Because a lot of it, quite frankly, is coming from drug trips, and visionary experiences out in the desert and so on. So, a lot of the descriptions that you see in like the Pista Sophia or whatever are just impossible for me to wrap my head around. And the writing is, I don't think it's very good writing either. There are some Gnostic texts that I like the writing very much. But, you're talking like this very broad range of people and schools and ideas and socioeconomic means. This whole idea, that Gnostic is really just not a very descriptive phrase, because it's sort of used to fold in every Christian heresy of the ancient world. Merry Christmas, Lawrence. Thank you. Good night, Janet. Wonderful to see you. Thank you for joining us. Just because says missed most of the presentation. Well, it'll be up immediately. Okay, so you can probably start watching it as soon as I hit stop. So, Josh says Discworld is way cooler. Yeah, there you go. Anyone else? Anybody else? Indiana Joe says, what are 3 books to read, listen to that are the most beneficial for this time in our lives, in your opinion? Oh, gosh. I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know. I wish I could answer that. I can't. I really can't answer that. But we should start doing book club again next year, so we can start doing it that way. My birthday is coming up in 3 days, so I've always had a mystical connection to Christmas, whether it was Jesus' birthday or not. Well, I guess you have. It's on Christmas. It's interesting. Like back to Acharya, like the fact that she died on Christmas. I kind of wonder if like that was maybe like a little bit of a not entirely natural demise. She was very sick and she was terminal. So, I'm sorry, Indiana Joe. It's just too big. My head is, my head is in this stuff right now. The Synchro Handbook. Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's a good one. That is a good one. Mm-hmm. Alrighty, so in 40 seconds, I'm gonna stop the show because I'm gonna stop it at exactly the 2 hour and 40 minute mark. I wish I didn't notice that clock, so because now I'm gonna be like, should I stopped it at the clock here or the counter? OCD isn't fun, folks. It's not fun at all when you can't go anywhere because you're always worried about, leaving the oven on, things like that. Oh gosh, now I have to wait. All right, so 2-minute warning. Yeah, I didn't want to pump, my own books. That seems a little déclassé, but I always do recommend my books to everybody. I'm always very fond of my books. I work very hard on them. Thank you, Veneer Traditionalists. You have a good night now. Good night, Raj. Very, very, very glad. OCD is Irish for compact disc. Oh, all right, Dad. That's a dad joke if ever there was one. Chris, thank you, sir. You are welcome. Thank you for joining me. Hope you enjoyed it. We can make this an on-running discussion. It'd be kind of interesting to get, feedback on people. It was just me blathering on for 2 hours, so. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it.